So today I'm going to just walk through a little bit of the National Association of Realtors settlement that happened. A lot of realtors are asking about it and trying to get more information. I'm just going to give a rough breakdown of what we kind of went over at a mastermind at our broker and kind of talked about some of it. We don't know everything yet. That's the biggest thing we want to mention to people. And also, nothing is changes until July 2024. So that till July 2024, it's continued business as is. So the main thing, of course, we all know that there was a $4.8 million verdict that happened. So it affects over 1 million realtors nationwide, but it does, and we're all done. The people who are in that, like it says in there, number two, they're all released from liability nationwide, all local state associations, all realtor owned MLSs. Everyone is now released from liability. That was some of the thing that NAR fought for, is to keep us from having anything and having to worry about any more liability. But unless you're with Home Services of America and related companies, they have not finished. They didn't agree to the payout for the concession, so they're still arguing with the lawyers right now. And that was of up. So today is like I don't know. I think it's the 21st today of March 24th. So it just happened a couple days ago. So as of right now, they're still arguing, as far as I know, I'm on March 24th, 2024. Just we did this video. They're still kind of fighting it right now. So I don't know what's happening with them. Nobody does. We're going to see how that affects any Home Services of America and their companies. So what, of course, the verdict says, we're all the realtors other than them are released from liability. They're not going to be able to go after. Nobody's going to be able to go after realtors for commissions and such, according to the settlement. Practices was going to change. Everything they were going to talk about is going to go into effect in July of 2024, and we'll get into some of the things that they talked about. So the National Association of Realtors, or NAR, is going to pay $418 million over the next 4 years. This is going to include the three main lawsuits by sellers and all copycats, not covered by the buyer tenant plaintiffs. So if there's any buyer tenant plaintiffs that come out, anything separate, that's not covered, but this includes all three of the main lawsuits by the sellers and all the copycat lawsuits that they're trying to do. They kind of lump them all together. So the next thing we're going to talk about is what is going on and what people are saying and what we have to kind of pay attention because of this. So right now, or I shouldn't say right now, starting July 2024, as you see on the left-hand side, you're not going to be able to put an offer of buyer broker compensation in the MLS. So right now is, when you go to the MLS and you look at a home you want to show your client, it shows you what you're going to get paid. So you already know before you go. And as they say, the MLS is the law. So if it says in the MLS you're making your whatever percent, 2, 3, 4, for builders it could be 4 or 5, whatever your percent is for the property. When you go in there, it's going to be there, and you're going to get paid that. If you download that MLS sheet, that's your commission right there because they have it on there. That's changing. So it's saying right there, look at bullet number 2, that sellers may offer concession via MLS that could include buyer broker compensation, but it has to be asked for in the contract, and it's subject to everything in the contract. And one of the biggest changes that's happening is a buyer agent cannot be paid more than your negotiated amount on your buyer tenant rep agreement, your buyer broker agreement. In Texas, we call it our buyer tenant rep. So if I sit down with my buyer before we start looking for homes and I say, I usually, whatever my charge for whatever for working with you as my buyer, it's 3% of the purchase price, and that's my commission. Now, if the seller's only willing to pay 1, then the buyer has to realize they have to come up with that other 1, or the seller's only willing to pay 2, and I usually get 3, and that's my commission that we agree to, and they sign. At that point, the buyer can be held responsible to pay the agent that 1% difference. Okay. Now, on the buyer tenant rep, on the buyer tenant rep, if you only put 2%, and the listing agent is like, hey, I'm willing to pay 3%, but you only put 2, they don't have to pay you more than 2. You can only get paid what you put on the buyer tenant rep. So if you put 1% because that's all you think your buyers can afford to pay you, and you work with a new build that's offering 5%, then you just lost 4%. because you can't get paid more than what's on there, according to this new thing. So you're gonna have to. You can start higher if you want and work down. So you can ask to get paid 5%, and then if you go to a home and they're only paying 2, you now have a 3% loss, and you don't have to get paid that much. So you can get paid less. You just can't get paid more, and that's a huge difference that's coming out of this, of course. Another thing is a lot of buyer agents say, hey, my services are free. They don't cost you anything as a client. Here are my free services. You can't say that anymore starting in July 2024. You no longer have free services per se. Now you have to know everything you do, you're going to get paid for. So otherwise, there's no, unless you do something and there's no compensation. So if you want to open a door for free and they're not part of your client, if a client calls you and said, please open this door, and you don't have a buyer tenant rep and you just open the door as a nice person to do that, if you want to do that, that's your business. I think you're crazy, but that's your business. And then they don't have to pay you jack, even if they buy that house, because you don't have a buyer tenant rep with them. Now, as you see, buyer brokers negotiate fees prior to showing. Okay, so you can't just say, well, I'm going to get paid whatever the seller is paying. You have to reach out to the listing agent and say, hey, what is your seller paying? Are you paying 2%, 3%? Whatever they're going to pay at that time, you need to reach out and get that. And then, of course, that needs to be in writing as part of the contract. And the other thing, you can't have a blanket, unconditional, or unilateral offer of compensation to a buyer broker, which means the seller may negotiate buyer to buyer, which would mean that if my buyer wants to buy a listing, every time I put in an offer, that listing agent receives an offer. Say agent 1 says, I want 2%. Agent 2 might say, I want 3%. Agent 3 might say, I want 5%. And he can negotiate everyone separate. He doesn't have to say, or she doesn't have to say, hey, my seller is only offering 3%. That's what you're going to get. It's now negotiable. They can negotiate down for their seller, even if the seller is willing to pay a certain percentage or whatever the commission is going to be. They can continue to get a buyer to come show the home. It's now negotiable for each person. So listing agents have to learn how to be a better negotiator on behalf of their buyer, and buyer agents have to be willing to work with the listing agent. So everyone's going to have a lot more communication as we start going forward. Now you got to remember, in practice, 315 is when they had the 315/2024 when the news came out. The buyer commission could be displayed on the MLS and it couldn't change. If it said 3%, they had to pay you 3%. And then most states only required agency to represent a buyer, not a seller. And then the offer, all these type of things, you could open a door for any buyer if it's convenient, and it wouldn't matter. You wouldn't have to be paid. You wouldn't have to have a buyer tenant rep. These are the things that are changing. Okay, and then when I mostly work with a lot of buyers, a lot of agents that I talk to and I do trainings, they don't have a conversation with their buyers and say, this is what we expect, this is what I'm bringing to the table, this is what I do for you, and this is my commission because of that. Because the sellers would pay it. The person selling their home, it would come out of the listing agent's commission. So this is what we need to start thinking about, like what's happening today moving forward. Okay, so we need to think, how can we start doing this? And we're going to talk first about sellers, okay? So when you look at your listing presentation, you need to understand when they say, well, I just read this NAR thing, I don't have to pay anyone anything. You're going to have to be able to explain, hey, that's not how it works. Like they said there, you're going to have to take them beyond the headline. So you're going to have to explain, how does compensation to the other broker, a buyer broker, or the other agent, how does that work? How many MLS, so many MLS, like it says right there, are reporting only 50% or more sales have commissions. So most MLSs aren't even reporting the concessions. So are you willing to give concessions? So right now they're also meaning by that statement that if I have a home I'm selling and the seller's like, you know what, I'm willing to pay $10,000 towards concessions. So those concessions can be used to pay your buyer's agent commission. So instead of calling it a seller concession, that's now their commission payment. So things like this can all be changing. Again, no one really knows yet. We're all figuring this out right now. Concessions can be part of the pricing conversation, or they need to be, they should be. Now, if you have a FHA or VA buyer, it's going to change the whole gamut when going forward, because FHA and VA are not allowed by law right now to pay the buyer's agent. So it's going to be very interesting to see how you work. I live in San Antonio, Texas, so I work with a lot of VA buyers. And I'm going to have to figure out, hey, you can't pay my commission. So when I put an offer on a home, I have to have good communication with the listing agent in order to get my VA buyers, to get myself paid for my work with my VA buyers. So are you going to offer any showings to buyers, or are you going to refer the calls? So that's another question. If you have a sign out in the yard and someone drives by your listing and says, hey, I want to see your home. Usually, as a listing agent now, I want to get someone else to represent them. Am I going to try to, call them or just say, yes, I'll open the home? I'll have another agent open the home and I'll tell that agent, this is your client. They want to buy the home, but I'm only paying you 1% or $1,000 or whatever you want to do. It's going to be very, very interesting going forward. And then, of course, dual rate commissions, variable rate commissions. So we could have different, different rates, different commissions. All this is going to change. We don't, like I said, a lot of them saying again, we don't know what's happening. We only know the background. We're just kind of going over things that could do it. So it's important right now to update your listing packets, your menu of services, your fees. Say this is what, like what I do in my trainings. I give a whole packet and say, here's my menu of services: gold, bronze, silver, gold, platinum. Each one is a different fee. Each section picks a different amount of services, and then you can go through that and pick that and share that with your client and say, as a listing agent, here's what we offer. And by doing these services, this is what we're going to pay to the other agent. And you already have that set so they know what those services are. This is just an example. This is not real, of course. This is an example that you can use when you're some of your verbiage. So you can put in buyer, seller to pay, buyer credit, 3%, 2%, whatever, at close of escrow to satisfy buyer agreement with buyer broker. You can do wording like this. This is what we're designing right now to go in the contracts. And I know some things are going to have to change, maybe an additional information, anything like that in the contract where you can talk about that. Because you're not going to be able to put it on the MLS. You're going to have to put it a different way, maybe additional documents, maybe on the side. There's going to have to be a way where agents can know what they're going to get paid. Now, when you work with buyers, it's going to be very interesting now. You're not just going to say, I'm just going to meet you at the property. Because now you need to sit down with your buyer beforehand, of course, and you already talk them on the phone what they want, what they're looking at. Now you have to have that conversation and say, here's my buyer tenant rep. Now you are responsible for my commission. They always were, but agents weren't holding them to that. So now you're going to have to really hold your client to that. Say, you're responsible for my commission. And then they're going to have to look at that and see what's going on and how they're going to work. And then you're going to have to look right there. Does you have a website? Do you have a blog? Are they going to show the services you offer to your buyers? And you're going to have to explain the process like I'm doing right now. What's changing? How are we going to take care of our buyers who want to buy homes, who barely have enough money for a down payment closing cost with that expensive housing market? How are they going to come up with an extra $9,000-$10,000 to pay the realtor fees that are owed for their realtors? A lot of them can't. They won't be able to buy a home. So you're going to have to say, what can we do? Can you go back to here, like we talked about for the seller, and have this negotiated with the seller before you talk to your buyers? Hopefully you can. And then you're going to have to, when you do your resumes and your stats, you're going to have to say, hey, what have you done? Well, I've done so many contracts written and I had them accepted. I've shown, an average of 5 homes to find the correct home with my clients. Or my closing days average, save my money on the list price. Whatever you can do. So if I'm offering so if someone's selling a home for 300,000 and I come in and say, I'm going to give you a full price offer, but you're going to have to pay my 3% buyer's commission if that's what I'm asking for, or whatever it is. And then they might be like, that's fine. I only want to pay 2%. And then at that point, I can negotiate. Okay, that's great, 2%. Let's go ahead and drop the price then. Let's get seller concessions that help with closing costs. There's so many things that are moving now. I call them pots of money. There's ways you can move money around the contract. There's so many different ways you can do that. This is going to open up a whole bunch of discussions and a whole bunch of different ways we can do this. So like you want to say right now, a lot of agents don't do this. You need to treat your buyers like you do your sellers. You're going to sit down with them and give them a consultation of what they can expect. So you need a buyer's agent. I'm a buyer's agent. This is what I'm offering. Here's my IBS. He's my buyer tenant rep, et cetera, et cetera. This is what we offer for you. You need to have that worked out now as a buyer. So now, some things are going to be changing in the industry, which is good. If you're an agile agent that can change and move with the community, this is going to be great opportunities for us. A lot of agents are already getting out. They're like, I don't know what to do because they don't have the system. They don't understand. They don't have the backing. These things are going to get rid of a lot of agents that don't really know their business. So the agents that are left for the majority are hopefully going to be better quality agents. So we already know that there's going to be updates to the realtor forms. Your MLS rules, that's going to happen in July. We're not going to be able to post the changes of how much we're going to pay. That's all changing. And then, of course, we already know we're going to have to see different changes in lending for FHA and VA buyers because they can't pay the buyer's agent. Are they going to have no representation? If that happens, they're going to get, so I hate to use the word screwed, but they're going to get screwed out of money because they're not going to know. They can ask for this, they can ask for concessions, they can buy the rate down, they can do different things that they're not going to know by having a good buyer agent to walk them up. And then the relocation market. So usually with relocation, the relocation company will pay the agent or pay a certain percent of the commission for their client to move to help to pay for the agent. Now they're going to all have to have that really disclosed. How are buyers reps going to do? So if I work for someone who's relocating, they're going to say, no, the relocation pays all my fees. So then is my buyer really my buyer client, or is the relocation the person that has to agree to pay my fee? It's all going to be changing. And all these things, as I mentioned, we don't really know. A lot of this is changing. I'm just kind of going over some great points that were made at our last presentation we did. So I hope that explains it. Please leave any comments you have and any questions, and we'll go through and I'd love to answer them for you. And we'll do our best to answer any questions, and we'll get through this together and make it amazing.